Everyone in that courtroom laughed when she walked in, a 17-year-old girl with worn-out shoes and no lawyer. But by the time she walked out, the judge was silent, the prosecutor was exposed, and the system had been shaken to its core. This is the story of Imani Rhodes, the teen who didn't just fight the law, she rewrote it. That morning, the Arlington County Courthouse was shrouded in a thick mist, as if nature itself sought to preserve a moment that would change everything. The stone steps leading into the main hall were still damp from the night before, each footstep echoing like a quiet warning. Today would be different. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered against worn marble columns, guardians of a justice system too used to certainty. But today, this court would have to relearn everything it thought it knew. A young black girl, just 17, stepped into the courtroom. No one noticed her at first. Gray hoodie, worn jeans, old Converse sneakers. But her eyes, quiet and unwavering, were the only thing that didn't match the rest of her appearance. She had no legal representative. Her name was read aloud: Imani Rhodes, defendant in a third-degree theft case facing up to 3 years in prison if convicted. At the bench sat Judge Malcolm Harlan, once dubbed the sentencing machine by the local press. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply glanced from the file in his hand to the small girl standing before him. "Miss Rhodes," he said, voice dry and dismissive, "do you understand what you're being accused of?" Imani nodded, calm and composed. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." The room fell into a weighty silence. No one expected a girl like her to speak that way. No one. Judge Malcolm Harlan raised an eyebrow and dropped his pen onto the desk like marking a strange moment. In all his years on the bench, he had dealt with countless unruly teens, troublemakers, liars, but never anyone quite like this girl. She stood before him without fear, without submission, and answered him with a composure that felt almost unsettling. "Do you have legal representation?" he asked again, slower this time. "No, Your Honor. I'm representing myself," Imani replied without hesitation. A ripple of murmurs stirred through the courtroom. A minor defending herself in a criminal trial? Laughable? Alarming? Or perhaps bold? A man in the front row furrowed his brow. An older woman sat up straighter. Within moments, all eyes turned to her. The prosecutor, Gavin Clay, stepped forward with a smirk. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case. The defendant was caught red-handed at the scene, with the stolen items in hand. I don't think we need to waste the court's time." Then he turned to Imani, his smirk growing. "Unless, of course, she'd like to try out a few debate team arguments." Imani didn't look at Clay. Instead, she calmly retrieved a thick file from her small backpack. Neatly organized documents with color-coded tabs and clear plastic sleeves. She walked slowly to the defense table, her gaze steady, unshaken. "Your Honor," her voice rang out, clear and strong enough to reach the back row, "I have a formal response to the prosecution's claim, particularly regarding the admissibility of Exhibit B." Clay chuckled. "Exhibit B? You know how to cite evidence already?" "Apparently more than you expected," Imani replied without looking at him. "Exhibit B, the surveillance video, has no timestamp. Additionally, it was retrieved from an unverifiable source, violating proper chain of custody procedures." The courtroom's mood shifted immediately. Clay froze. Judge Harlan frowned, turning to the clerk. "Is that true?" The clerk flipped through the paperwork. The silence was so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. "She's right. No timestamp, no documentation of origin." Clay's face reddened. That's not possible." Imani smiled faintly, a small smile, but powerful enough to silence the entire courtroom. "What is going on here?" Judge Harlan growled, eyes locked on Clay. "You submitted an unauthenticated video into a criminal trial. This isn't a mock trial at a law school." Clay stumbled. We received the footage from a cooperating witness. We haven't had time to fully verify." "No time?" Harlan snapped. "She's the defendant. It's your job to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, not throw in a random video and call it justice." Meanwhile, Imani stood motionless, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Your Honor," she continued, "I've conducted a legal analysis of the prosecution's full evidence package. It outlines each weakness and procedural flaw. With the court's permission, I'd like to present it." "You wrote it yourself?" Harlan asked. Yes, based on the Virginia Criminal Procedure Code, Section 14.3 regarding evidentiary authentication. The room was silent. She was no longer just a girl. She was controlling the courtroom. She was a wind no one had felt before, Ian, cold, strong, and completely unexpected. Gavin Clay clenched the strap of his briefcase, sweat beading on his forehead. With all due respect, Your Honor, this defendant isn't old enough to present arguments like a licensed attorney. Maybe not old enough, but smart enough, Harlan muttered, eyes still fixed on Imani as if seeing something unimaginable. Imani placed her hand on the table. If there are still doubts, I can confirm my legal status. Calmly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black wallet, then held up a professional ID card, a bar-certified legal license, bearing the name Imani Rhodes, registration number VR114207, issued by the Virginia State Bar. 1 second, 2 seconds, silence. Then Harlan motioned to the clerk. Verify it. The clerk typed rapidly while the entire courtroom held its breath. Verified, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Imani Rhodes is a registered attorney. She passed the bar exam last year. Official records confirmed. Several spectators rose from their seats. Clay leaned back, stunned pale. Harlan rubbed his temple. This girl, he muttered. No, this young woman just did something I've never seen before. Imani simply said, I warned the court, never underestimate what you don't understand. Imani stood still. She didn't need to say another word. The bar license in her hand spoke volumes. But what truly captured the courtroom wasn't the card. It was her presence. She wasn't arrogant nor defiant. She was simply solid, grounded, the kind of presence that came not from ego, but from knowing exactly who you are and why you're standing there. Judge Harlan rubbed his forehead as though trying to rearrange broken pieces in his mind. Miss Rhodes, he said, his tone now softened. I need to understand why. Imani took a slow breath, because this system was never built for people like me. A black girl with no family, no backing, no voice. If I didn't understand the law, I'd be crushed by it. So I read, I studied, I skipped grades. I passed the bar because I had no other choice but to survive through knowledge. The courtroom went still, so silent they could hear the ceiling fan hum above them. Gavin Clay had nothing to say. The crowd that had once scoffed at her now sat in stunned quiet. They didn't know whether to see her as a defendant, a lawyer, or something else entirely. Judge Harlan leaned back in his chair and his expression changed. No longer the stern authority figure, now a man realizing he'd just encountered something no law textbook ever warned him about. Continue, Miss Rhodes. I'm listening, he said, voice low but firm. Imani nodded, returning to her table to pull another document. Regarding Exhibit D, the alleged confession, I formally contest its validity. Your reasoning? Harlan asked. The statement was taken after more than 5 hours of interrogation, without legal counsel, no guardian present, no medical check. It violates Article 12 of the state constitution regarding juvenile rights. Clay stood sharply, his voice rising. She was aware enough to waive counsel. That article doesn't apply. Imani didn't even look back. I have the full audio recording of that interrogation, automatically logged by the police system. Here's the transcript, Your Honor. She placed the document gently on the judge's bench. Her tone remained calm. Her hand didn't shake, not even once. Clay took a step back, jaw tight, hands trembling slightly. He had been hailed as a near unstoppable prosecutor, but now his arguments fell apart like cheap fabric. Meanwhile, Judge Harlan flipped through the transcript, his brows narrowing with each line. Where did you get this recording? He asked without looking up. Under the Freedom of Information Act, Imani replied. I submitted a request as both a citizen and a licensed attorney. The law gave me access. Clay stammered. You accessed that system? I did, Imani nodded. And I analyzed it. The procedural flaws are undeniable. Judge Harlan looked up at her again, this time with something between awe and concern. You don't just know the law, he said slowly. You know how to make the system obey it. The courtroom held its breath. No one moved. Even the smallest gestures felt too loud. One clerk whispered under her breath, "Holy hell." Imani held the judge's gaze. "I'm not here to play lawyer. I'm here to force justice to live up to its name." Judge Harlan folded his hands in front of him, resting his elbows on the bench. His voice no longer carried the cold edge of courtroom routine. Now it held the weight of reflection. "You realize," he said, "if what you've presented holds up, this won't just overturn a case. It will force a review of the DA's office, maybe even the department's entire process." "I do realize," Imani answered. "And I also know that if I don't speak up, there will be hundreds like me, young, poor, black, convicted by a system that doesn't follow its own rules." Clay remained silent, his face drained of color. The gallery, once buzzing with whispers, had turned into a chamber of silent agreement. They weren't doubting her anymore. They were listening. "I'm not asking for favors," Imani continued. "I'm asking for fairness. If the court believes this case should proceed, I'm ready to continue. But if not, I respectfully ask for a ruling, one that reflects the law, not assumptions." Judge Harlan said nothing. His hand reached for the gavel. It hovered. "After thorough review," Judge Harlan began, his voice steady like a bell at dawn, "I find the prosecution's evidence fails to meet the legal standards required. Exhibit B, the surveillance video, is inadmissible. Exhibit D, the confession, is procedurally invalid." A soft wave of breath moved through the crowd. "Therefore," he continued, "based on significant evidentiary and procedural issues, the court hereby dismisses all charges against Imani Rhodes. This case is closed." The silence that followed lasted only seconds. Then came the eruption. Applause, gasps, whispers, even stunned stares. Some people rose from their seats. Clay slumped down, defeated and pale. But Imani didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply lowered her head in gratitude, placed her documents back in her worn backpack, and turned to leave. No one saw her as a child anymore. They stood aside as she passed like they were witnessing something sacred. Not a victory, but a reckoning. As Imani stepped away from the defendant's table, the echoes of the gavel still lingered in the air like the final note of a symphony. The courtroom, moments ago a battlefield of skepticism and assumption, had become a shrine of stunned reflection. Judge Harlan remained seated, motionless, as if even he needed a moment to grasp the weight of what had just transpired. The gallery parted like waves, allowing Imani to walk down the center aisle. Some spectators clapped respectfully, others whispered to each other in awe. She didn't rush. Every step she took seemed measured, not out of arrogance, but out of purpose. A reporter from a local station dashed toward the courtroom door, phone in hand. "She's not just a girl. She's a certified attorney. This is history," she whispered into her mic, eyes wide with disbelief. Judge Harlan finally exhaled. "Court is adjourned," he said, though his voice now lacked its earlier force. It sounded like surrender, not to Imani, but to the truth he could no longer ignore. Imani reached the exit and paused, not to look back for approval, but to feel the silence. In that silence, she knew she hadn't just won a case. She had disrupted the architecture of assumption. The courthouse steps were flooded with reporters. Microphones extended like spears, flashes burst like lightning, and voices overlapped into chaos. But as soon as Imani appeared, everything slowed. She didn't push through the crowd. She simply stood. "Miss Rhodes," someone shouted, "how did you manage to do what no one's done before?" Another voice, "Are you really a licensed attorney? At 17? A woman's voice cut through, "What's your secret?" Imani looked around at the crowd, some skeptical, some amazed, many just confused. Then she raised her chin slightly, her voice steady and warm. "There is no secret. The law is not a weapon. It's a mirror. And today I just held it up to a system that forgot how to see itself." That single sentence rippled through the crowd. Phones were lifted, tweets were typed, newsrooms scrambled for headlines. Behind her, Judge Harlan had come outside, standing off to the side. He watched the girl, the young woman, who had shifted the axis of his courtroom, and in a rare moment of vulnerability, he nodded, not just in acknowledgement, but in respect. Imani saw it. She didn't smile, but she didn't need to. The next morning, her name was everywhere. Teen attorney topples courtroom giants. The girl who outlawed the law. Imani Rhodes from accused to advocate. Some headlines were sensational, others patronizing, but all missed the deeper truth. This wasn't just about her. It was about the system she had dared to challenge. Invitations poured in, talk shows, podcasts, university panels, but Imani declined most. Her answer was always the same. This isn't about spotlight, it's about structure. Instead, she chose to speak in one place, a small community forum at a local youth center. The room was packed with high schoolers, law students, single mothers, ex-convicts, and kids who had already stopped trusting in the idea of fairness. She stood on stage, no microphone needed. I didn't win because I'm brilliant, she told them. I won because I was desperate. Because no one was going to fight for me unless I learned to fight myself. The law is not just words. It's the last rope before the fall. And too many of us don't know how to grab it. People didn't just clap. They stood. And from that moment, she became more than a headline. She became a voice. Within weeks, the ripple turned to waves. Clips of Imani's courtroom moment flooded social media. Civil rights groups began citing her case as a reason to revisit juvenile interrogation practices. Bar associations took notice. Judges across the state reviewed their own procedures. A legislative aide in Richmond whispered, she might have just triggered a bill. But Imani didn't watch the coverage. She was in libraries. She was at youth centers. She was answering emails from kids who wanted to know where to start. She never called herself a movement, but the people did. At a televised legal roundtable, a retired Supreme Court justice commented, "This young woman reminded us that the courtroom is not a castle. It's a service window, and sometimes it takes a storm to reopen it." Meanwhile, Gavin Clay, once untouchable, was now under formal review. His decisions, his record, his interrogations. What once earned him promotions now raised serious questions. And Judge Harlan? He issued a statement the press didn't expect. "I was wrong," it read. "Not just in judgment, but in imagination. I underestimated her because I never imagined someone like her existed. That failure is mine to carry." By the end of the month, people no longer asked, "Who is Imani Rhodes?" They asked, "Where's she going next?" She wasn't interested in fame. Instead, she created a program, Justice Literacy, a free legal resource guide for teens and underserved communities. She didn't want to be the last. She wanted to be the first of many. Interviews came and went. Cameras followed. But when asked what moment defined her, she never pointed to the gavel strike or the headlines. "It was when the judge looked at me," she once said, "and I saw not power, not authority, but understanding. That's when I knew something had shifted." One afternoon, she walked past the courthouse steps, the same ones where she once stood alone. This time, she wasn't alone. Beside her were two students she mentored. They had files in hand. One was nervous, the other was silent. She stopped, placed a hand on their shoulders, and whispered, "You're not walking in to prove your worth. You're walking in to remind them of theirs." And then, for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Change didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Inspired by Imani, schools started hosting Know Your Rights sessions. Public defenders used her case as a teaching tool. A new clause on juvenile representation quietly made its way into proposed legislation, informally dubbed the Rhodes Provision. Imani, however, stayed grounded. She still took the bus, still wore the same gray hoodie, still visited the library every Tuesday. Fame had tried to catch her, but she kept walking ahead of it. One evening, she returned to the courthouse, not for a trial, but for a town hall. The room was packed, not with lawyers or judges, but with teenagers, parents, and teachers. She walked up to the podium. "The courtroom is not a weapon. It's not a fortress. It's a place where truth is supposed to live. But truth doesn't walk in on its own. You have to carry it in." A student raised his hand. "What if they still don't listen?" Imani smiled. "Then speak louder. And if that doesn't work, learn their language and rewrite their rules." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, like a heartbeat, a movement, growing stronger, one voice at a time. While Imani's story blossomed, another one unraveled. Gavin Clay, once the golden boy of the DA's office, now found himself facing internal review. Investigators combed through cases where minors had been interrogated without counsel. Mistakes he once buried were now surfacing, ugly and undeniable. He sat alone in a windowless office, staring at a screen filled with articles about her. Imani Rhodes, the girl he dismissed, mocked, tried to break, had not only beaten him in court, but exposed a culture of shortcuts he thought would never matter. In a closed-door meeting, the chief prosecutor didn't mince words. "You didn't just lose a case, Gavin. You embarrassed this office. You reminded everyone of what happens when arrogance replaces process." Clay didn't respond. What could he say? Outside the room, he caught a glimpse of a flyer. Community Legal Aid Workshop, hosted by Imani Rhodes. He looked away. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the man with answers. He felt like the problem. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Imani's small apartment. It was handwritten, on official court stationery, from Judge Malcolm Harlan. "Imani, you taught me something no law school ever did. You taught me that justice requires humility. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope for change. If ever you find time, I would value a conversation, not as judge to lawyer, but as student to teacher." Imani read it twice. Then again, she didn't respond immediately, but the letter stayed on her desk, carefully placed between her case notes and a well-worn copy of Thurgood Marshall's biographies. A month later, she met Judge Harlan in a quiet courthouse cafe. No robes, no titles. He asked, "Why didn't you just walk away after winning?" Imani looked at him and said, "Because if I walk away, they'll say it was luck. But if I stay, they'll have to admit it was truth." Harlan said nothing for a while. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. And for the first time, he listened. Fully, the movement Imani never planned had grown into something living. Justice literacy became a nonprofit, spreading to 5 states. Volunteer attorneys held clinics. Teens hosted mock trials in gymnasiums. Schools painted murals of courtroom scenes with Imani's quote etched in bold, "Justice isn't a room, it's a responsibility." One mural showed Imani not in a courtroom, but outside it, arms folded, standing beside kids just like her. No spotlight, just presence. She traveled now, sometimes by train, sometimes by plane, always with the same bag, always with the same mission. During a speech at Howard University, a student asked, "Do you think the system can really change?" Imani answered, "The system is just people, and people change when they're made to see." She paused, then added, "And if they still don't see, we teach, we show, we remind." Applause followed, but again, it wasn't loud. It was strong, unshakable. Years later, long after headlines had faded, her name remained. Imani Rhodes wasn't a trending topic anymore. She was a chapter in law textbooks, a case study in ethics courses, a quote on courthouse walls, but she never stopped showing up. Not for the press, not for praise, but for people. One evening during a community workshop, a young girl asked her quietly, "Were you scared?" Imani knelt down, looked her in the eyes and said, "Yes, but I was more afraid of staying silent." She placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "You're not here to prove them wrong. You're here to prove yourself right." And with that, Imani stood, returned to the front of the room and began teaching. Again, not because she had to, but because she knew. Justice is not a destination. It's a voice, and hers would never be silent again. Imani didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she prepared. Her story reminds us that justice isn't reserved for the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who refuses to stay silent. Too often, young people, especially Black youth, are told to wait their turn, to stay quiet, to be realistic. But change has never waited. Imani showed us that knowing your rights, using your voice, and demanding fairness isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. No matter your age, background, or shoes on your feet, you have power. Use it.